European leaders will meet in Brussels on Thursday and Friday to further coordinate their response to the pandemic and the bloc's economic recovery. Reintroducing travel and tourism across the bloc is a priority ahead of the launch of a digital COVID-19 certificate that should make crossing borders easier. Sarah Morice reports.
Europe is already welcoming back a few lucky sun seekers. These tourists who've made it beachside in Spain are not regretting their decision.
I don't know, happy to be away. Sick of being in Ireland.
Very good place, sunshine, eat and drink is every time good.
Most European Union countries are allowing residents from other EU countries in for holidays. Some are also permitting tourists from outside the bloc. Rules for entry differ between countries. Some insist travellers be fully vaccinated or show negative COVID test results. Others are made to isolate for up to 14 days on arrival, and in some countries there are no restrictions. But for people that rely on tourism for income, there's still not enough tourists.
Demands for hotels has not recovered yet because of the issue with Britons having to quarantine. Because of that, Britons are not coming, and they are usually the most predominant tourists here.
Here in the UK, if we holiday abroad, in most instances, on our return, we either have to isolate at home or go into hotel quarantine for 10 days. Obviously, that's deterring people from travelling overseas. But in the next few weeks, the government will consider easing those rules. And if it does, it's likely to spark a rush on European holidays. But with cases of the Delta variant soaring in the UK, not everyone wants the Brits back in Europe. Last month, Portugal let British football fans in for the Champions League final in Porto, and now it's dealing with a spike in cases too.
I regret that we haven't been able to agree on common travel restrictions among the member states, and this now has consequences. We now have a situation in Portugal that maybe could have been avoided. On July the 1st, the EU's digital COVID certificate should be accepted in every country across the bloc. With the scan of a QR code, travellers will be able to prove they've either been vaccinated, have recently recovered from the virus, or have had a negative test. And in a bid to get more people on their beaches, European leaders will use this week's summit to also discuss opening the certificate to citizens outside the EU. Sarah Morice, TRT World.
For more on this, Vicky Price joins me from Athens. She's board member at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Welcome to the show. Now, we know officials are going to be discussing extending that COVID-19 certificate for people from outside the bloc. Tell me, how important is it for the EU to start hosting international visitors soon?
Oh, hugely important. I mean, we have seen what happened through the pandemic, that countries that rely most on tourism have been the ones that have been worst hit. So that includes, of course, Spain and Italy and also Greece, which is where I am now, which has been slowly opening up. But absolutely, once you are able to move freely across Europe, then that makes a tremendous difference, obviously, to tourism receipts, as you've been suggesting in the preamble to this discussion. And of course, to growth, because if a large percentage of your GDP is dependent on this, then obviously trying to save as much of this season, this summer season as possible is a top priority for many countries right now.
Well, we also know that there's disagreement over this international minimum corporate tax rate. Now, why are different members at odds, and can we expect some resolution at this summit?
Well, we have seen, for example, countries like Hungary and Poland that haven't been particularly keen on having a minimum global corporation tax rate. I mean, Poland, if I remember correctly, is 19%, which is higher than the 15 minimum, but in Hungary it's lower. I think there is more an issue that until now, certainly, I mean, even though there is a single market in all sorts of other areas, taxation remained the prerogative of individual sovereign countries, and that is quite important. Of course, we've also had Ireland with the 12.5% corporation tax rate that has attracted loads of firms to go and headquarter there, international firms, multinational firms, American headquartered firms that have also moved European operations to Dublin. They weren't happy at all at the beginning. And the question, of course, is whether it will work. There has to be acceptance across. The G7 may have said yes, but they need to get it through the G20, and they need to get it through all the countries that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has been dealing with for quite some time now to try and alter the tax regimes in a number of countries, which is now considered to be disadvantageous, of course, for those countries where big multinationals operate. They make a lot of money out of the sales, and then, of course, they move the profits somewhere else, and the finance ministries in those countries receive very little. So you would imagine that there would be general agreement that it's a good idea, but somehow or other, I think it has touched all sorts of sovereign principles, which some of the countries are concerned about.
Right, and talking about disagreements with Hungary, we know that the Commission has essentially given the green light for all members to spend their way out of this pandemic-induced slowdown, so to say. But what about these sanctions that are being threatened against Hungary and Poland? Do you think that might come to pass soon? And won't that sort of harm the recovery of the overall bloc?
Well, the important thing is, of course, that we need to remember how the EU was constituted, is constituted. There have to be democracies. And of course, the rule of law needs to be accepted. But of course, freedoms need to also be respected. And the concern has been that both Hungary and Poland moved in a number of areas where perhaps some of that freedom of expression and the freedom of being able to operate in a way that is quite similar to what happens in other countries seems to be threatened. So it's been going on for quite some time, of course, but you're absolutely right to link it to the national plans that have been put together to use some of the money which has been made available centrally to help the recovery and resilience of the entire area. Now, you could argue that Hungary and Poland perhaps are not that large, but of course, Poland is very, very tightly linked industrially with Germany. So you would indeed imagine that one way needs to be found to ensure that the spread of that money has the impact in terms of growth and prosperity that is meant to have across the entire EU. And it would be pretty hard if some countries were not able to partake in that the way that they would like to. So obviously it's a negotiation that needs to take place, but there is no doubt that Europe is very serious about.
And Vicky, very quickly, before we let you go, we know it's been 5 years since that Brexit vote, and there's still outstanding issues between the UK and the EU. Do you see any sort of progress taking place on that during this meeting?
I think so. There has been a lot of pessimism about it, but actually I think it is in the interest of both sides to have some agreement that at least extends for a period the checks that are needed to be made for goods coming into, going particularly from GB, which is the rest of the UK, and then Northern Ireland, which has been a serious bone of contention. So the protocol that has been negotiated as part of the withdrawal agreement is the area where all the focus needs to be right now. Otherwise, the relationships between the UK and the EU will deteriorate even further.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show with your analysis. Always good to have you, Vicky Price, there, joining us from Athens.